Video is being brought to you by Law School 101. I am Oshin Malpani. In this video, we'll be discussing a concept from mathematics, that is percentage. I'll be discussing the concept from the very basic level, so make sure you get your concepts right before attempting the questions, because that will be your most powerful asset, getting your concepts right. Then you can move on to more complex questions, but first you need to get your concepts right. So make sure you watch the entire video and get your concepts sorted first. So let's begin with the video. So first of all, the term percentage, percent, that means part per 100. Cent is 100, so parts per 100. So for example, if I say 75%, I am basically saying 75 parts per 100, right? So percentage, parts per 100. So let's move on to the first concept. First concept is basically how you convert a percentage value into fractional value and the vice versa. So if I ask you to convert let's say 1.1 by 5 into percentage, that is a fractional value into percentage, what you need to do is just take the fraction and multiply it by 100. Just remember that, multiply it by 100. Just take the fraction, multiply it by 100 to convert it into percentage. Remember, parts per 100, so basically you are making it parts per 100. So if I have the fraction 1 by 5 and I need to convert it into percentage, what I'm going to do is simply multiply it by 100 and my answer will be 20. So my answer would be 20%. Now the opposite of it, like if I ask you to convert a percentage into a fraction, what you're going to do is do just the opposite. That you take the percentage and divide it by 100, right? So for example, if I ask you to convert 20% into a fractional form, you take 20, you divide it by 100, and you'll get 1 by 5 as the answer. So 1 by 5 is the fractional representation of 20%. So you must be very well versed with this, because it is very helpful and it will be helpful in your questions. So just to recap, if you want to convert a fraction into percentage, multiply it by 100. If you want to convert a percentage into a fraction, divide it by 100. And now I'll also suggest that you take important percentages, like for example, let's say 75%, and you convert it into fraction. So 75% will basically be 3 by 4. So you take such important percentages, for example 75%, 50%, 25%, 10% fraction, and you convert them into fractions. And this what it will do is basically it will ease up your calculations, and it will speed them up. So if somewhere someone asks you like what is 75%, you have your answer 3 by 4 ready. So you just try to remember these, make a table of these things. It will be helpful in your question solving while you're sitting there and with limited time, so it will be helpful. Let's move on to the second concept. It is not really a concept but a type of question. These are the off questions. So these questions come like, what percentage of y is x? So the easiest way to crack these types of question is to read the question very properly and break it down into small understandable pieces. So if I ask you what percentage of y is x, so immediately this diagram should pop up in your mind. So y will be the bigger circle here and x will be the smaller circle. And what I'm asking you is, what is the shaded region part of this y, right? So you have to tell me what percentage of this shaded region, that is the yellow shaded region, percentage of y, that is the blue region. So understand these questions properly and break them down into very small bits. Always remember that when you are solving these questions, the bigger value, that is the one which is the bigger value, that is y, will come in the denominator, x will come in the numerator, and you multiply it by 100, right? So what you're basically here doing is uh, x by y is your fraction, and now we know the trick to convert it into percentage, right? So you multiply it by 100. So that's how you solve these questions. Always remember that the bigger value will be at the denominator. If y is the bigger value in this Venn diagram, the fraction would always be x by y, and then apply the concept 1 and convert this fraction into percentage, and the final format would be x by y into 100, which is equals to some z percentage. Okay, so y would be the bigger value, x would be the smaller circle, into 100 is basically just converting a fraction into percentage. Let's move on to the next concept. Okay, so here is an example. What percentage of 700 is 70? So 700 is the bigger circle. Just make sure this diagram pops up into your head for easy understanding. So this is 70 and the bigger diagram is 700. So you take the smaller value on the top, the bigger value in the denominator, multiply it by 100, the answer would be 10%. So these are very easy concepts and you must know them by heart. Next concept is difference. Next concept is basically taking our difference in terms of percentage. So the question would be like x is how much percent or more or less than y, right? So again this again using Venn diagrams just eases up things a lot. Now remember that you'll not be using Venn diagrams to solve such questions in CLAT or AILET because the time constraint, but for your understanding for now, use these Venn diagrams to understand the concepts very well, and later on it would not take so much time. You'll just get through the questions really quick. So again, remember to break the questions into small understandable parts. Now, I'll try to explain what this question is trying to ask. So x is how much percentage more or less than y. So again, y is the bigger circle, x is the smaller circle, and this time they are asking us to find the percentage in terms of difference. So this difference, which is the shaded yellow region, they are asking us to find this. So what percent of y is this shaded region, which is y minus x, right? Y minus x is. So that's what the question basically asks us. So this is what we have to find. Now this will come into percent form, so you into a fraction form, I'm sorry. So to convert it into a fractional, to convert it into a percentage form, you just multiply it by 100, right? Using the concept one. So the format would be the difference which is the question, which the question is asking you, which is y minus x in this case, upon the base, right? Now base would be always the quantity by which the comparison is being done, which is y in this case, and which will always be in the denominator. Okay, remember that. And then you multiply it by 100 to convert it into percentage form. Moving on, fourth concept is not really a concept but a trick which I really used a lot when I was preparing for my exams. So assume that that an unknown variable which is given in the question is a well-rounded number, like let's say 100 or 400 or 1000 or etc. This will ease up things for you, so you don't really have to take x and then move in form of linear equations or something like that. Just assume this x to be something, and in the end what you can do is compare it with the real values to make it a real value. Now this will be a bit hard without example, so I'll give you an example. So, example is my salary decreased by 50% and subsequently it was increased by 50%. Right? By what percentage did I gain or lose? Now, normally, how would you solve this question is take x and decrease it by 50% and all that. It would be very tedious and time consuming in examinations like CLAT, AILET. So what I did, and I also use this in my examination. What my method of doing this is assume that my salary was 100. Okay, I'll go slow with this. So assume that my salary was 100. So first case, I'll decrease it by 50%. So 50% of 100 is rupees 50. So my new salary would be rupees 50. That is 100 minus 50. Okay. Next, the question says that it was subsequently increased by 50%. So now I will increase it by 50%. Now remember, this increase of 50% won't be on my original salary because now my salary is just 50. So this 50% increase will be on this new salary, that is 50 rupees. So 50% of 50 would be, now if you convert this percentage into fraction, 50% is 1 by 2. 1 by 2 of 50 is 25 rupees, right? So this is my increment. 25 rupees is my increment. Now 50 plus 25. So my new salary is rupees 75, right? Now the question in the end asks me by what percentage did I gain or lose. So my initial salary was 100 rupees. My final salary is 75. So basically I lost rupees 25, right? And now 25 is what percent of 100? We know that. So we just divide 25 by 100, right? And then multiply it by 100 again. So I'll get 25% as the answer. So that's how you solve these questions. Just assume a value, not necessarily 100. I assumed 100 because it was easy to assume. You'll see questions where it is not very beneficial to assume 100, and there we will assume something else, so which I will tell while we are solving some questions. So as I was saying, sometimes there will be real figures rather than variables, okay? So they will not really ask you in terms of x or y, but they will give you real figures. So in cases like this, keep assuming 100 as your figure, and in the end you can compare the final result with it. Now again, we'll need an example for this, so I'll go slow with the example. So the question is, there was a hostel which had certain number of students living in it. During a outbreak of swine flu, 10% 10% of the students died. This set a panic during which the 10% of the remaining students left the hostel. The strength of the students in the end was 243. Okay, 243. Now this is a real value which is given by the question. Now this might confuse you, like how can I assume something now because we have a real value? Don't worry, just assume something. I'll tell you how. So the question is asking, find the original number of students in the hostel. Okay, so what we are going to do is assume that there were 100 students in the beginning. Okay, just assume that for once. Assume there were 100 students in the beginning. Now first case was 10% of the students died, right? So 10% of 100 would be 10 students, right? So 10 students basically died of swine flu. So the remaining students were 90 students. Okay. Now the second case was 10% of the remaining students left. Okay. The remaining students, not the original number of students, but the remaining students, which is 90, right? So 10% of 90, which is equals to 9 students. 9 students left due to the panic, right? They left the hostel. So now how many students remain? Remaining students in the end are 90 minus 9, which is equals to 81. Okay. So this is our imaginary value. This is imaginary because we had assumed there were 100 students, and then we did the operations on that, and now we have 81 as our imaginary value. Now, according to the question, the final strength of the students were 243. 243. Now this is the real value, and according to us the answer is 81, which is the imaginary value. Now if you compare these two numbers, what you're going to do is you just need to find out how many times is 81 of 243. So this is the, like, I'll try to explain it, but if you don't really understand, well, try solving some questions with it. And what I mean by compare is, you assume that 81 is being multiplied by x, and then it will become 243. Okay, so you're just comparing these two values. So 81 is 243 is 3 times of 81, right? How did you get this 3? You just did 81 multiplied by x is equals to 243. So x would be 243 upon 81, which would be 3. Okay. So now this 3 is a converter. It will convert all the imaginary values into real values if they are multiplied by it. So this now means that now we have to multiply everything by 3 to make them all original or real values. Okay. So the according to us, the original strength was 100, which was the imaginary value. You multiply it with the converter, that is 3, and you get the real value, which is 300. Okay. So I hope you understood this concept. It's a very important thing that you need to understand for this trick to work. So make sure you understand it. If you didn't understand it, just recap the video, watch this solution once more. I tried my best to explain this. See if you understand this. So this 300 is basically our answer. Now don't do this in CLAT, but just to check if your answer is correct, start with 300. So this time start with 300 as the original population of the hostel, and keep decreasing the strength as and when the question asks you to do so. Okay. So now we will be discussing some questions, around 4 or 5 questions. These were the basics that you need to know. I just suggest that you understand these concepts very well rather than mugging up the formulas or the formats. Now, one major trick I always used in my preparation was assuming everything as 100, and I'll be using this for 4 to 5 questions which I'll be solving here. I'll also give you a test sheet of around 20, 10 questions so that you can apply this on those questions and practice really well. Always remember that watching these videos will just make up your concepts, will just get your concepts right. You need to practice on your own at the end. So just practice a lot using this trick. If you find this helpful, just practice a lot and you'll be able to do it in a very quick fashion after you practice. So let's begin with our questions now. We'll be discussing around 4 or 5 questions. So let's take the first question. In the recent assembly elections in Rajasthan, 75% of the registered voters cast their vote. This is basically the voter turnout, out of which 2% of the votes were declared invalid, right? A candidate who got 9,261 votes, which were 75% of the total votes. Okay. Find the total number of voters enrolled in the election. So it might seem intimidating at first, but it's not. Believe me, it's not. You just start by assuming something, and then you just move on. Okay. So this is the real value. We will solve the question with our assumed value, which will be something that we'll assume, and then we'll get to this real value in the end by comparing those two values. So let's begin with the solution. Now I would suggest that you pause the video here and solve this question by yourself, and then see the solution, so that it would be helpful if you do it by your own self. So let's move on to the solution. The solution would be, assume that the number of voters enrolled in the elections were 400. Okay. Now you might ask, why 400 and not 100? So I did not assume it to be 100, as it would have made the calculations a bit difficult. Now remember that the first operation that we have to do is 75 of the registered voters cast their vote. So this was basically the voter turnout. So if you know, 75% is basically 3 by 4, right? So I selected 400 because it will be easily cancelable by 3 by 4, right? So this will come by practice, and you will not just understand it in the first question. Keep practicing and you'll understand what you should assume according to the question and what fits the best. Okay. So I assume that the number of voters enrolled in the elections were 400. Okay. Now let's take the case one. Case one says that only 75% of the voters came to vote. That is 75% of 400, which is 3 by 4 into 400, which is equals to 300 voters. Okay. So 400 voters were registered, only 300 people voted in the elections. Now case 2, 2% of the votes were declared invalid. Now this means that only 98% of the voters uh, vote was actually accepted. What this means is, these 300 people voted, right? These 300 people came to vote, and out of them, 2% of the votes were rejected, maybe due to some problems with the counting machine or the EVMs, something. Okay, so 2% of the votes were rejected. What this means is, 98%, only 98% of the votes were counted from these 300 voters, right? If 2% were rejected, 98% remained. So 98% of 300 is 294. Okay. So these were the actual number of votes which were counted. So 400 were the voters enrolled, 300 was the number of people who came to vote, and 294 votes are the votes that were actually accepted, right? I hope I'm making everything clear, and I'm doing this because this is a concept video and I want your concept to be as strong as possible. So just bear with it. So case 3 basically says that a candidate who got 75% of the final votes got 9,261 votes. Okay. Now 9261 is the original value which is given to us by the question. Our value would be 75% into 294. Okay, so this is the vote one of the candidate got, 75% of 294, which would be 441 by 2. I'll not be getting into the calculations, just do it yourself. 3 by 4 into 294, which will be equal to 220.5. Okay, now you might ask, how can the value of a vote be in point 0.5? It cannot be, but remember, this is an imaginary value, not a real value. So in imaginary value it can be anything, right? So now this is our imaginary value. According to us, this is the answer. According to the question, 9261 is the real value. So now what we do is basically compare our imaginary value with the real value. So again you do this, 220.5, which is our imaginary value, multiplied by something x, which will give us the real value. This x is the converter here. It will convert imaginary values into real values. Okay, so this x would be nothing but 9261 divided by 220.5, which is 42 times. So what this means is, to convert every imaginary value into a real value, you just need to multiply it by 42, right? So if we assume that the original number of voters were 400, we multiply it by 42 to get the answer as 16,800, which is the answer in real terms. Okay, now this 42 can be used anywhere. So if they ask you how many votes were actually accepted in the second case, in the second step, what you are going to do is take your imaginary value, that is 294, multiply it by 42 to get the real value, and it will give you the real value of how many votes were actually counted, right? So this 42 is a converter and can be used on any imaginary value to convert it into a real value, as and when the question asks you to do it. Okay, next question. I give 40% of the money I own to my wife. So let's say I had certain sum of money. I give 40% of it to my wife. I gave the 20% of the remaining money after, like, remaining, that means after giving to my wife the money which I had, I give 20% of it each, okay, each to three of my sons, right? Now half the amount which now was left with me after giving it to my wife and my three sons was spent on buying grocery, and the remaining amount of rupees 12,000 was deposited in the bank. How much money did I originally own? Now just label these. 1200 is the real value. Uh, this is the step 1, this is step 2, this is step 3. So let's go to the solution. Again, pause the video for a while, do the question by your own self. If you solve it, very good. If you're not able to solve it, watch the solution and try to solve it again. Just don't watch the solution, move on to the next question. Watch the solution, come back to the question, solve it by your own, and see if you got the answer this time. So let's move on to the solution. Again, I will assume that I had rupees 100 in the beginning. Okay, so first case, I give 40% of the money, that is 40% of rupees 100, which is rupees 40, to my wife. So remaining money with me is rupees 60. 40 I gave to my wife. Now case 2, I give 20% of the remaining money. Okay, just understand these things very well. This is where most of the students go wrong. Remaining money, not the real money, right? So I had rupees 60 remaining. 20% of 60 would be rupees 12. Now here we will go back to the question again. The question said that I gave 20% of the remaining amount to each of my three sons. So that means I gave rupees 12 to each of my three sons. That is, I gave away 12 into 3, which is equals to 36 rupees to my kids. Okay, each son got rupees 12, and in total I gave 36 rupees to my kids. So remaining money would be rupees 60 minus rupees 36, which is 24. Okay, now the case 3 is basically saying that half of the remaining money was used to buy grocery, which was so half of 24 is 12. So rupees 12 was spent on buying grocery. So the remaining money would be rupees 12. Now this is our answer, but an imaginary answer. Now in the question, the real value that remained with me was rupees 12,000 and our imaginary value is rupees 12. So now we will compare them. How you compare them? By now you should be well versed with it. So 12 into something x is equals to 12,000. This x is our converter. So x, if you divide 12,000 by 12, you get 1,000, which is x. So 1,000 is our converter. Therefore I had in the beginning 100, which is the assumed value, into 1,000, which is the converter, to get the real value, which is 1 lakh rupees. Now this is your answer. If you want to check it, go back to the question, start with 1 lakh rupees, give 40% of 1 lakh to your wife, then 20% of the remaining to each of your three sons. Half of the money spend it on grocery and remaining half deposit in the bank. You should be left with nothing. So this is basically how you solve. Let's do one more question. This one is a fairly easy question. So Jack's salary is 20% less than Jimmy's salary. By what percent is Jimmy's salary more than Jack's? Right? Easy question. What you do is assume that Jimmy's salary is rupees 100. Right? So Jack's salary is 20% less than Jimmy's salary, which is 20% of 100, that is rupees 20. So Jimmy's salary is 100, that we assumed, and Jack's salary would be 80 rupees. Okay. Now the difference between their salaries is rupees 20. You do nothing here, just use the concept number 3. Take the difference, take the base, multiply it by 100. So the difference between their salaries would be rupees 20, that is 100 minus 80, which is 20. And at the base we have 80 because we are comparing it with Jack's salary, right? What percentage is Jimmy's salary more than Jack's? So Jack is being compared here, so it will be in the denominator. So 20 by 80 into 100 gives you 25%. Easy question. Okay. Now, next question. In a village panchayat elections, only two candidates stood up. Understand this fact. Only two candidates stood up. One of them, who got 43% of the total votes, 43% of the total votes, lost the elections with a majority of 240 votes. The question is asking you to tell the number of votes which are actually casted. Now this might again seem a little bit hard, intimidating, but it's not. Start by assuming that there were 100 votes casted. Now one candidate got 43% of the votes, that is 43 votes. Okay. Now since there were only two candidates, the other person obviously got 57 votes because 100 votes were casted, and out of which one candidate got 43%, so other person obviously got 57%. All these are imaginary values. Now the question says that the candidate with 43% votes got lost by a majority of 420 votes. Okay, so what this basically means is the difference between him and the winning candidate was 420 votes. 420 votes. Now let's take our imaginary values. The difference between our imaginary values is 57 minus 43, which is equals to 14. So 14 is our imaginary answer. 420 is the value given by the real value given by the question. What you do is next is easy. Compare this value with the real value. So 14 into something x is equals to 420, right? So x turns up to be 300. Now 300 is the converter. So when you assume that 100 votes were casted in the beginning, just multiply it with the converter to get the real number of votes which were casted in the beginning. So 100 into 300 is equals to 3000. So that's how you basically solve these questions. Let's take one final question. In the CLAT exam, a candidate scoring 25% misses the cutoff for NLU Jodhpur by 30 marks, while another candidate scoring 50% of the marks gets 20 marks more than the cutoff for NLU Jodhpur. Find the cutoff of NLU Jodhpur. Now, this is a hypothetical question. Okay. So I'll read the question once more. A candidate who scored 25% marks missed the cutoff for NLU Jodhpur by 30 marks, and other candidate who scored 50% marks got 20 marks more than the cutoff for NLU Jodhpur. Basically, question is saying find the cutoff for NLU Jodhpur. So again, we'll be solving this question by a different method, because you see you can't really assume anything 100 or something here. So first, let's take the difference in the percentage of scores these two candidates scored. So one scored 50% of the total marks, other scored 25% of the total marks. So the difference between them in terms of percentage is 25%. Understood? Now the difference between them in terms of marks is 50, right? Now I'll explain why. Let's assume this was the cutoff of NLU Jodhpur. Beyond this, everyone is taken in. Beyond this, beyond this point, everyone is rejected. Okay. So now the candidate who did not make it to NLU Jodhpur missed the cutoff of NLU Jodhpur by 30 marks, right? So this is 30, and the candidate who was selected to NLU Jodhpur got 20 marks more than the cutoff of NLU Jodhpur. Let's assume that he went to NLU Jodhpur. So this is the selected candidate, and this is the rejected candidate, and this is the cutoff. So he got 30 less than the cutoff, he got 20 more than the cutoff. So the real difference between them is of 50 marks. Okay, understood? So the difference between them in terms of marks is 50. Therefore 20%, 25% of something is 50 marks, because okay, 25% in terms of percentage and 50 marks in terms of marks. Now these both are equal, right? So 25% of something is 50 here. That means 1 by 4 of something is 50. So what this basically becomes is 1 by 4, which is 25% of a value x is equals to 50, right? So how do you find this x? You just take this up there. So x will be 200 marks. So the total marks of the paper were 200. Now obviously you know CLAT is of 200 marks, but it was a hypothetical question. So we got to this value 200 marks. This was the total marks. Now if the total marks were 200 and one candidate scored 25% of it, that is 50 marks, he missed the cutoff by 30 marks, right? So the cutoff must be the 80 marks, right? So if 80 was the cutoff, this rejected candidate scored 50, so he got rejected by 30 marks. Okay, that's what the question says. So we have got our cutoff marks, which is 80 cutoff marks for NLU Jodhpur. So now basically what you do is find out how much percent of 200 is this 80. So 80 divided by 200 and 200, which is equals to 40%, which is your answer. So the answer to find the cutoff for NLU Jodhpur is 80 marks, and in terms of percentage, it is 40% of the total marks. Okay, so this is the end of the video. I hope you learned something. I hope your concepts are better now. What I will suggest is practice a lot of questions. I will be attaching a practice sheet with this video, so make sure you go through the practice sheet, practice all the questions. Then at the end there will be answers mentioned. Check your answers. If you didn't get something correct, do the question again and again. Keep struggling with the question, and eventually you will get to the end. So that's the best way of learning these questions. Keep practicing a lot, and you will eventually get there. So thank you so much for joining us. If you like this video, if you like this content, make sure you like, subscribe, and share this video, so that we can bring more such content to you. And also, if you have any specific requests, some suggestions, or some criticism, just put them down in the comment section below, so that we can improve ourselves. Thank you so much.